Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode. Dr. Brent C. Satterfield, a DNA scientist whose inventions have impacted millions around the world, is also the author of a new book, Bringing Home Heaven, which is his true story of multiple encounters with heaven, where he was led to see how much bigger heaven is than anything he was ever taught or imagined.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey. Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Accounts of near-death experiences and related encounters with heaven often have contradictory descriptions of the nature of God, sometimes reflecting the individual's culture, religion, and faith background. But what if a single person had multiple experiences, seeing heaven through the eyes of more than one culture? What might it reveal about the origins of faith and religion? Or more importantly, what might we discover about the role of each culture and our collective purpose in bringing heaven home? Dr. Brent C. Satterfield invented DNA testing technologies that have impacted millions of people in more than 50 countries, including in the COVID-19 pandemic. Following multiple experiences with heaven, Brent became a student of consciousness, faith, and experiences of God in cultures around the world. Brent is now a second-time author. His first book, Faith to Produce Miracles, is currently available to purchase on Amazon, along with his latest book, which we'll talk about tonight, Bringing Heaven Home. We are here with Dr. Brent Satterfield, who's written a great new book called Bringing Heaven Home. Hey, Brent, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's awesome to have you. It's a very interesting premise. Before we dive into the book, I want to kind of talk a little bit about who you are. Your bio says you had a suicidal childhood and you became a born-again Christian. So can you just give us kind of the backstory of what happened in your childhood and your religious beliefs and who you are today?
Okay, sounds great. So I had actually a fairly good childhood in the sense that I had both parents. They were very loving. They were good people. Growing up in the South, I had a lot of attention from my dad, kind of a perfectionist type attitude, spare the rod, spoil the child kind of thought process. And so if I came home with a 98% on a test, I got in trouble. I didn't make the 100. And so the question was, why did you miss something? Or even if I got 100, it was, why didn't you get the extra credit? So a huge amount of emphasis on perfectionism. And he and I ended up getting in a fist fight when I was 14 years old. And I left home for a little while. And when I came back, he had kind of stepped out of the parental role. He just backed off, and I had wildly free bounds. And so my teenage life was dictated more or less by the question, what would dad hate if I did it? And so I was very depressed throughout a lot of my teenage years, suicidal, tried to commit suicide a couple times. Wasn't very successful, or I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And when I was 21, I had some experiences with the other side that led me to be baptized and to start practicing the Christian faith. Over quite a period of time, number of years, like 20 years or so, I reached a point where I started having out-of-body experiences with the other side. Found myself on the other side and experiences with Jesus, with God. And I was shown a reality that was a lot bigger than what my Christian background allowed for. And it caused me to step outside of those earlier boundaries to start understanding people around the world, to start understanding various spiritual conversations taking place in cultures around the world.
Wow, that's a interesting childhood. You eventually became a scientist. Your science pedigree, how did that affect your religious beliefs? Did you have a battle between them, or did they coexist?
I think mine more coexisted. I went into science with the purpose of trying to be of service to people in the developing world. I wanted to impact the people who needed it most. And so I started looking at how to lower the cost of healthcare in the developing world. And so right off the bat, science for me was a means to an end to help further those religious ideals. That being said, I mean, you run into lots of ideas that don't always coincide with what religions are teaching. And so there would be moments where I'd have to think really deeply to try and bridge the scientific understanding, the data that I was seeing versus what is commonly taught in religious culture. And I think that actually helped me some to start seeing that there is a difference between spiritual truth and religious culture.
Wow, great. Now, can you tell us about some of your science achievements, particularly with your DNA research?
Sure. I've been studying DNA technology, specifically in the testing arena, for close to 20 years now. And the work that I've done is similar to what you'd see on like crime scene investigation, where police officers who are looking for the DNA of different criminals and trying to identify them. So using that same kind of fundamental technology, I just developed better ways to immediately determine what the genetic fingerprint is. And then I applied it towards the diseases that afflict people in the developing world. So looking at things like tuberculosis, like HIV, and more recently, the COVID-19 pandemic, which started overseas and then came back to the US. And so my technology was used there to do testing for more than 10 million people in over 50 different countries. So that was really exciting to be part of that.
So as an aside, what is your thought about COVID-19? Do you think it was genetically modified to be able to spread to humans, or do you think it was more of a natural form that was released in the world?
You know, we are at a point scientifically where it's not out of the realm of the possible to have a virus be genetically modified. But we're also at a point in human history where there is so much interaction with the natural world that jumps from like a bat species to humans. That's not out of the realm of possibilities either. And so I wouldn't be surprised to find out that either answer was the correct one.
Okay. And before we go into your book, you founded the Inner World Movement. You mind telling us what that is and what its mission is?
Sure. The Inner World Movement's actually connected to the book. And to the extent that we as human beings begin to have experience with the other side, to the extent that we begin to experience the divine, not just as something we talk about on Sundays or in whatever religion that we associate with, but a very real experience. It changes the way that we see the world, and it changes how we see ourselves. And there are a growing number of people in the world who are starting to feel that there really is more to life than what they've been taught, than what it appears to be, and that they have the ability to begin to go into their own inner space to understand the thoughts, the emotions, the quality of experience that gives rise to what they see in the world around them. And as they begin to have these thoughts, the question is, where do they start? How do they begin to become aware of it? How do they develop the tools necessary to start to modify their internal space so that they can connect with a divine love in the here and now.
And inner world movement, so that implies like their consciousness, right, within their mind. So kind of dealing with how they receive information within themselves versus what's outside of them. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate. It very much has to do with the relationship between information inside of us, the thoughts, the emotions, and then what's deeper than the thoughts and the emotions, and how that affects the world around us.
And how would you define consciousness?
Consciousness is simply, for me, it's simply what is. And I prefer a definition that doesn't define it. One of the effects of having crossover experiences, like the first one that I had, I came back from it with such conviction that I had seen everything that I shouldn't say everything that was to be seen, but this thought process of I've seen what's on the other side, and it confirms my religious convictions and the way I see the world. And then I had another crossover and another one and another one. And after a number of these, I began to realize that I didn't understand at all what was going on the other side. And the way that I had constructed the world without even knowing it, the way that I had constructed my worldview, how I saw myself, how I saw God, how I saw others, that was impacting my ability to continue learning. And so these days, when somebody asks a question like, how do you define consciousness? My preference is to not define it and to let it be what it is, because without definition, I leave space for it to continue to evolve in my understanding.
So is consciousness different in the earthly world than it is when you do your out-of-body experience and go to divine love and where that is? Is it a different form of consciousness there versus here?
Our awareness of consciousness is vastly different. And I think that's one of the things that people really zero in on, is that here in this world, there is a constant need to fill some kind of an inner void. Like there's always this seeking. There's always something that we need that we're trying to fill our life with. And on the other side, there is a sense of being so incredibly filled. And it's not just, full of contentment. It's peace, it's joy, it's love, it's bliss, it's all of these things. And at least in my experience, it was so intense that I found myself weeping almost continuously throughout the whole thing, but not like a sadness weeping. It was just this joy that was so overwhelming that there was no response for it other than to weep uncontrollably. And it just continued and kept getting bigger. And so I would say, yes, absolutely, there is a difference, not only in the quality of the experience, the emotional experience, but in the way that thought operates. Because here it seems like we can have one, maybe two thoughts in the mind at a time. We can have one, maybe two emotions at a time. But on the other side, there was this capacity to see, hear, and feel many different things all at once. There was an opening of the capacity to feel more than just what you're hearing, seeing, and touching. It's beyond the five senses to where there is an intuitive understanding. It's almost like, like for example, during one part where I was going through a life review, instead of walking through the events in a linear fashion, the way that we might think of in this world, it's like if you could step outside of your life and see that timeline all on a line, where you could view all of these different events at the same time and have the capacity to process large amounts of it in parallel, and then ask questions about each of those different parts and have deep insight and understanding all taking place in a single moment. It's just the capacity to think, to comprehend it's freed up. It's much bigger than anything that I personally have experienced in this life.
It reminds me when I did the documentary. So at the documentary, I kind of have a bunch of different chapters about different types of seekers and spiritual people. And even there was an astronomer on the science end too. And at the end, I had a section about their experiences with the paranormal. And he had this kind of thing where he, as a college student, he had this weird thing in a library. He became one with the universe, and he was still alive and conscious, but he felt like he described it as being a canary in the cage, and the cage is open, and you step outside. And rather than seeing a couch or a rug or a wall, you were part of it. And there was such a sense of joy and happiness. And when he came back to his normal physical being, he was really depressed. He was not happy because he wanted to go back to what he called home. Is that similar to kind of what you're talking about?
So I love the analogy of the canary with the cage open. That is beautiful. And each one of the experiences I had was different. So I did have a unity experience very similar to what he was talking about. Some of the other experiences were more of the traditional thought process of encountering God, encountering beings on the other side. But in all of them, there was that similar thought where coming back to the body, it was a period of time of mourning. Like, I don't want to be in the body anymore. I don't want to be in this world anymore, because that over there was so beautiful and so wonderful that there was a period of very intense depression of, oh my goodness, I don't want to be in this space anymore. How do I get back there?
It seems like we've already talked about the topic of the book, Bringing Heaven Home. It's a memoir of your multiple experiences with heaven, which is weird. Most people just want to go to heaven once, but you went many different times, right? And it's rather than a Groundhog Day, it's a different experience for you almost every time. So can you talk about your very first out-of-body experience and then a couple of the other ones and how they were different?
Okay. So one of the things I've noticed in years since all of these have transpired is that a lot of the accounts of near-death experiences and related out-of-body experiences, an individual has a single experience and they have it from a particular perspective based on the culture that they grew up in. And sometimes it's not the culture they grew up in, but it's still a single perspective. And it's been fascinating to look at these and read the different accounts and think, what makes them different? And one of the experiences that I had was that I had multiple of these out-of-body experiences, multiple encounters with heaven, and I had the chance to see through the eyes of different cultures. And it has led to a lot of deeper thought as to what people are seeing and experiencing, why they're seeing and experiencing it. And it has led me to the conclusion that heaven is a lot bigger than what most people tend to think it is. That there's more to it. It's not just a single place or a single way of knowing God, but that there are many ways of seeing and experiencing God.
Is it like a multiverse? One of the new things with quantum mechanics or quantum physics is there's a multiverse, not just one universe that we're in. I guess a question, and you're going to answer something else, but if I'm a Catholic here on earth, my earthly experience, would that affect my heavenly experience once I pass versus like a Muslim or a Jewish person? Does our earthly experience and our religious beliefs here affect what we experience in the afterlife?
For me, it did. And I can't say that it will affect it for everybody, but my religious beliefs very much colored my initial experiences with heaven. It's almost like heaven is interacting with us. God is interacting with us. The divine is interacting with us in a way that allows us to feel loved exactly where we're at, that allows us to have the maximum amount of learning that we can have in the current space that we're in. And so if it needs to speak to us through religious symbols and religious understandings, then it will do so. But I don't know that people are then stuck in that kind of heaven forever. It's almost, again, just referring to my personal experience, there is a time where it seems like enough learning has been done that you're shown other spaces. I do like the term multiverse because that was probably the closest way to describe these multiple experiences of heaven that I had, is almost like different realities, different heavens. And not just in terms of the kinds of religious symbols that were there, but in the feeling. I've had a hard time explaining this to a certain extent, but it's almost like if you grow up your whole life only having vanilla ice cream and thinking that vanilla is that's it. And then one day somebody takes you into an ice cream store and you realize, wow, there are other flavors and most of them are really delicious. It was a lot like that sense of there is more than one and the flavor of heaven is completely unique, each one different from the others. On top of that, there were certain understandings in each of those heavens, certain understandings in those perspectives that it felt like if we here on this earth could get past our judgment, past our fear, past our guilt, past all the things that divide us and start to learn from each other, not just learning what the facts are about each other's religions and not just learning things that seem to validate our own perspectives, but actually understanding the valuable pieces of those perspectives. that we could integrate them in such a way that would change the way we experience life on this earth, which comes back to the title of the book, Bringing Heaven Home. Because that was one of the biggest pieces that I was shown on the other side, is that the feelings I was being given, that I was experiencing, this expansive state of feeling heaven in reality, was something that we could bring back into our bodies in this world and eventually see the whole earth change as a result of it.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
What if the secrets of today were written in the stars? The Daily Horoscope is your key to unlocking the celestial messages meant just for you. Every single day, Aries to Pisces. Every sign has a story, and every day brings a new chapter. Whether it's love, challenges, or opportunities, let the stars guide you through. Dive into the Daily Horoscope and let the universe reveal your path. Subscribe now. Your cosmic journey begins today.
What about a person who's an atheist? So what about a person that doesn't believe in God or anything? What would they experience?
It's a wonderful question. And I'm going to reply just with an assumption here, because it wasn't like I asked God and said, what happens to the atheist or anything like that. But first off, my experience of the divine was completely opposite of my Christian background, which is to say that there was no judgment. And all of my life, my whole religious understanding was built on you got to do it right so that you're not judged, so that you don't disappoint God. And the experience there was no, God's not the one who judges. We are in this world. And that the divine being, the whole role of heaven is to liberate us from our judgment. And so to the extent that there's somebody who's atheist, my understanding is they are loved exactly as they are. They're enveloped in that love. And when they decide that they want to feel more joy, that they want to experience more than what they comprehend themselves as, that they will be given all the tools that they need to continue that journey. So there wasn't like this sense of that they wouldn't experience any heaven or that they would experience something bad. But there was another aspect to this where I realized that many of us in this life, we may not associate with one particular path or another, but our ancestors may have. Or there were threads to our learning, our experience that predate this life. And so it's more complex than just showing up here and saying, I belong to this religion or I believe in nothing. There are threads of purpose that follow us and that heaven speaks to us in a very individual way.
So do you think if you had committed suicide and you were successful as a child, do you think your experience would have been different because your life lesson on earth was different?
Most likely so. Because I would have been in a very different state of self-judgment at that time. And I would not have had the same capacity to understand what I was being shown. And so more likely than not, I would have had a very different experience.
Well, I'm glad you're still here.
I can't even begin to conjecture what that might have been.
You mentioned it was all love, all acceptance. Does that mean there's no hell, there's no darkness? Because sometimes you hear where people have near-death experiences, mostly they're positive, but everyone, in fact, I had an uncle that had a very positive one. But once in a while, you'll hear that negative experience that's frightened the daylights out of them. So from your perspective, is there no, just like on earth, there's good and there's evil, is there no hell in the afterlife? No dark place where some people go?
That, it's a complicated answer because my honest belief is I don't believe that there's any one of us who would ever choose to go to a space like that. I don't believe in a space where God sends us as punishment. I do not believe in that at all after what I've seen, what I've experienced. I do believe that we are very capable of creating negative circumstances for ourselves and that we can trap ourselves in emotions that are painful, that are hurtful, that we are unable to step out of on our own. And those types of experiences can become very hell-like. And you can talk to a number of people in this world who are already experiencing things like that. So I hesitate to say there is no hell, because there is pain. We can experience pain. We can have those experiences. But in the idea of the traditional sense that there is a God who would throw you into hell, no, I don't believe in that at all.
So here on Earth, we have free will, right? Supposedly, unless it's some big simulation that we don't know about. But here on Earth, we have free will. Do we also have a choice when we go to heaven on where we go and what we experience?
I absolutely believe that there is choice, and the choice is magnified. Here, we don't understand our choices. We are inhabiting these bodies. They come with programs. We don't even understand the programs. We assume that they are our identities, our personalities. However, when you dig deep, you find that a lot of the things that you believe come from your childhood. They come from experiences you had when you were too young to really understand what was happening to you. As an example, I learned over time that my relationship with God, my beliefs about God, were all formed from my early childhood relationship with my dad. I could never measure up. I could never be good enough. If I disappointed him, I could be punished. So I found that as I internalized this idea of love as a young man, I believe that God would be a lot like that. And it wasn't something I was sitting there thinking about in my mind, thinking, oh gosh, God must be like my dad. It was just the only way I'd ever known love was the way that I'd received it from my dad. So when I heard that God was love, it just was this unconscious assumption that God must also be disappointable. He must be always looking for more out of me. And if I don't do it right, then I'm going to be punished. And so going to the other side and experiencing that God's not like that, it was liberating. And so now there's a different kind of choice, because the choice is no longer limited by what we're afraid of, by what we feel guilt over, by what we feel shame over. Instead, the choice is entirely driven by love, the experience of joy from one moment to the next.
Did you ever reconcile with your father? Or if not face to face, did you just forgive him?
So he and I started talking again shortly after I was first baptized. And we've had a good relationship. I think that there's certainly room to improve it, just as there is room to improve most any relationship. But we get along fairly well now. Every now and then he reminds me of those years back a long time ago. I think most parents tend to do that. They regress us back to what we were like when we were 6 years old or something. And so there are still those moments, but we get along a lot better now.
That's good to hear. Let's talk about what's it like. I mean, were you totally shocked when you had your first out-of-body experience that you were able to do it? It had to be crazy to have that happen, to go out of your body, because I'll tell you, I think it would frighten the crap out of me, because I would be afraid of not being able to get back into my body. So I'm kind of curious about your first experience, and then we'll go into some of the other ones.
Yeah. So there certainly was some fear, and each one of these experiences, they started in a different way. And the first one, I was with a woman who'd had a series of near-death experiences following a plane crash. So the first one, she died in the plane crash, had an encounter with heaven, and came back. And then she had complications from that plane crash that caused several more deaths for her. And each one, she got to experience heaven and come back. And she was given a gift to help people cross over without having to die to get there. And she had reached out to me. I didn't even know who she was at the time, but she'd reached out to me and told me that she was supposed to help me have one of these experiences. And the story's fully written out in the book and everything. But at the time, I'd really been looking for deeper connection with heaven, and it felt right. So I went and met with her. And after a few meetings, I had this impressions, like this vision, as it were, that I had a piece of her heart. And I didn't know what that meant, but the feeling was so strong, I didn't question it. And so I reached out my hand as if to put it on her chest. And then all of a sudden I stopped, and I thought, I can't do this, because, I don't know how she's going to react to me putting my hand on her chest. But she saw what I was going to do, grabbed my hand and put it right over her heart and said, that's exactly where Jesus puts his hand. And so as soon as she did that, there was this eruption of energy in me. My whole body felt like it was on fire. It started to get to the point where everything inside me was going numb. My face was going numb. And I found myself in a state where I couldn't tell the difference between my thoughts and her thoughts. And I couldn't feel the difference between the boundaries of my body and the world around me. And so I was a little bit nervous, and I'm like, what is this? And she says, that's the feeling you have right before you cross over. And so she had me lay down, and then she used her particular gifts to help me go the rest of the way. But the moment I found myself out of my body, there was no fear. In fact, that was the most dramatic thing that I noticed. It was overwhelming, this sense of no fear. And I realized that never in my life has my body ever been in a state that it didn't have fear. And it's not like I walk around like worried about, getting run over or something all the time. It was this recognition that our mortal state, that there is a wall between us and the experience of divine love. And this wall, it's not decreed by God as if he's, some dictator saying you can't feel my love, but it's a wall that's created out of fears in the body, hurts in the body, jealousies, pain, guilt, shame, all of these types of emotions. And all at once, those were all gone. There was just absolute love. There was absolute acceptance. And so very different.
It sounds like jumping out of an airplane, with a parachute, where you just step out of the plane, out of security, and you plummet down to earth. And it's just kind of that freeness that you have when you're free falling. It sounds like that. And I wonder, is this your out-of-body experience? Is that also similar to death, do you think? That you're in your body, you're holding to your body, and then you're out of your body. And once you let go, that seems to be the transition. Sounds like out-of-body experiences are almost like a precursor to what death would be like.
Yes, very much so. And it's only painful until you let go. It's the fear that causes the pain. And I've since compared it to childbirth. Back when I was first married, our first child, my wife went through like 17 hours of labor, and she's screaming the whole time. And I'm thinking, this is the worst experience. This is awful. And of course, I'm sure it was worse for her.
Yeah.
But anyway, the second one, we were introduced to something called hypnobirthing. And they taught us, that the body like naturally wants to birth. But if you go into fear, the body shuts down its capacity to give birth, and it creates pain. And so this next one, she learned how to relax, and then she slept without any painkillers. She slept the entire way up until the baby crowned.
Jeez.
And the contrast between the two experiences was phenomenal. And so similarly, it's our fear that creates the pain. And if we can just let go and kind of surrender to the process, then it's much smoother, it's much easier. And then at the moment that we find ourselves on the other side, there's no more fear. And in fact, it's almost like this silly thing of, why in the world was I worried about that? Because it's so much more beautiful and life goes on.
You mentioned Jesus shows you multiple heavens beyond Christianity. Does that kind of imply that Jesus is omni-religious? He's like many religions at once. He's not just Catholic. He's not just Christianity. He could be other things. Does he extend beyond one religion?
It was my experience with him that he was more interested in my learning and my growth than he was in my religious persuasion. That he loved me more than any kind of religious affiliation that I could have. So as to what his personal denomination was, I didn't ask him. I didn't ask him if he was Catholic or Baptist or whatever. But it just seemed like a silly question, because there was just this understanding that he was love itself, and that whatever love was, that's what I wanted to be too. And so all of a sudden, all of these boundaries about I'm this religion or that religion, they were just gone. It was this feeling of, I want to be what he is. I want to be love. I want to be light. I want to be accepting of all truth. So to the extent that there is love in any other religion, I believe that he is very supportive of it. That's a personal belief.
Now, which version of heaven did you like the best? How many versions of heaven have you seen so far, and which version did you like the best?
I think that's a wonderful question. So I experienced a couple of versions of the Christian heaven. And then, because there's different flavors of Christianity, right? And so there's different understandings with Christianity. And so it's like, which version are you experiencing there? And then I experienced the Hindu heaven. I experienced And again, it's like there's multiple flavors of Hindu heaven. There is the experience of Hindu heaven as a being who's separate from it. And then there's the experience of Hindu heaven as a being who is one with it. And I had both of those experiences.
I thought Hindu was only one, that you lost your total, your total ego, your identity, that you were just one with the universe. So that's interesting that there are two versions of it.
I suspect that there are many versions of it, probably as many as there are different people. Because the experience of heaven, we kind of think of heaven like a place, like I'm going to go to Florida. There's only one Florida, and there's a beach, and we all experience the beach, and we have different feelings about the beach. But heaven is less like a place and more like an experience. If your heart as an individual is liberated and you're experiencing all of the emotional fulfillment that you could ever experience from now into the infinite beyond, the way you experience it is unique to you. There is no other person just like you. And so it starts to take on this character, this flavor that is so incredibly loving because it is, for the first time, very personalized. It's all unique to you. And so I think one of the things that we do that dishonors people who have visited this space and dishonors each other is to assume that we are all going to the same location as if the location were what mattered. When in fact, this is about an experience of having your heart completely liberated, opened up. And if it were anything else, it would not be heaven, because it wouldn't be what you need to feel liberated, to feel unbound, to feel completely exhilarated with love and joy.
So which one did you like the best?
So during one of my travels, I stopped at a Hindu ashram and spent a month there. And during one of the Kundalini experiences, I had the Hindu heavens open, where I was feeling this incredible joy. And this is the part in the book where I really got into the difference between vanilla ice cream and chocolate ice cream. And this whole debate of, gosh, how do I choose? Because I mean, and also a little bit of guilt over kind of wondering, okay, well, I felt directed by Jesus to look at some of these other cultures and religions and understandings, and I'm doing so. And now all of a sudden I'm having this euphoria. And am I being unfaithful? Because I'm really liking this one. And I'm having the question, did I pick the wrong one?
Did you have that doubt while you were doing it, or after the fact?
It's funny because like you're feeling so much joy and love and acceptance that like there almost can't be a doubt. And yet at the same time, there's a part of you that's connected to, well, at some point I'm going back to my body and my body has this feeling. And so there still is this understanding and awareness and asking the question, like, am I allowed to feel this? Like when I get back in my body, is this going to be a problem for me? So at that point in time, before I really even had a chance to delve into it, there was a voice that sounded throughout me. And that voice said, I'm the light that is in all things and through all things. And that means the light that is in all religions and through all heavens. And there was an understanding that in this world, we are time and space limited, meaning that we have to pick because we only have so much time. It's like, well, I like this flavor. I like that flavor. We've only got so much money. We have to buy a vanilla scoop or a chocolate scoop. We can't have both. But in the heavenly space, we're not constrained by time in the same way. And that there is the capacity to receive all of the beauty from all of the different approaches. And that to the extent that there is a highest heaven, it is a heaven that is inclusive of all light, all truth, all understanding. And so for me personally, if I had to choose a heaven, it would probably be that bigger concept where I don't have to choose just the joy that I felt in the Christian heaven or the joy that I felt in the Hindu heaven or the joy in any of the others, but where I can have all the joy in that space, liberated in my heart.
And when you're out of your body and traveling, what are you? Are you a ball of light? Are you energy that has no shape? What are you? And also, do you see any family members or loved ones when you're having your out-of-body travels?
So in those that were recorded in the book, I did not see any family members or loved ones. I interacted with a few different angelic beings. I interacted with Jesus. I interacted with God. I interacted with the light that's in everything. And as far as what I am when I'm having those experiences, I never actually asked that question. I never thought about it. It's almost like if you get really lost in your thoughts here in this world, or kind of almost in a deep meditative space, you can forget that you have a body for a moment and you exist as awareness. It was kind of like that you're having such a deep experience that I didn't really pay attention to what I was or what I wasn't. It was just this awareness having this experience. And yet, before you asked that question, I would have sworn that I was in a body, or that I had like the form of a body, but I never actually stopped to look.
Huh. And what was Jesus like? How did you know it was Jesus? And did Jesus have a body? What did Jesus look like to you? And how did you know it was him?
So the experience of Jesus there, and it may be different for people coming from different backgrounds, because I had the chance to experience heaven through the eyes of other people also, and kind of encountering their spiritual leaders, and found that they felt about their leaders the same way that I felt about Jesus, which was really, really surprising to me. That experience, I mean, not only that they would feel that way, but it would be a very real, very legitimate experience for them, just as real as my experience of Jesus. But saying all that, it's here we're kind of like limited to what our eyes see and what our ears hear. And we try to take that information we see with our eyes and we hear with our ears, and we compare it to some data bank we've been storing in our brain this whole time. In that data bank, we make comparisons and say, well, I think it's this person. I mean, even when you see your own family, there's still this process that goes on in the mind to identify them, to make sure it's them. And yet on the other side, you're not limited by that. It's almost like your vision and your touch and your hearing are all limitations on your capacity to experience. And so when Jesus would come, it's like before he would even appear, it's like my whole being would explode with light. And by explode with light, I was already in a space where I was feeling so much joy that I had the distinct impression that if my body had been with me, it would have just dissolved. It would have it couldn't have stayed together. The molecular forces that hold the atoms together would have just come undone. So I was in that a huge amount of joy already. And then when he came, as he was coming, in the moment of his coming, there was just this light that just filled my being, that exploded, taking me as much higher than the joy I was just feeling as that joy in the light itself was from the earth that I had just left. When you ask, how did I know it was Jesus? It's like it was just written in every part of my being. Here, you can doubt what you see. You can doubt what you hear. There's just no room for doubt, because you are the experience. You're having that experience. It's written in you.
So there's no bearded guy that you saw in a flowing robe or anything. It was just a sense that you recognized and you didn't see, but it was there.
So the experience for me on the other side, and other people might have had a different experience in this, but mine was this awareness that everything I was experiencing was like almost like it's being created inside you, that you are having these intense emotions and understandings. And they are so intense that it's like you have vision, you have touch, you have smell, because it's a bigger experience than any of those sensations. But if you chose to, you could still pay attention to them. And so my vision it wasn't like I have here. It wasn't even important because of the experience that was taking place. But I did see a figure, and he was clothed in light. And I have difficulty in being able to translate what I was seeing back into our language. But I perceived him as a bearded figure, yes.
And what about God? I mean, that must have been the total mind-blowing experience.
Yes. So, as I just mentioned, this explosion of coming into Jesus's presence, like I'd never known joy before, even though I was already in this light where I felt like my body would dissolve because it was so joyful. And then coming into his presence was just that much more. And so as Jesus led me into God's presence, it was that kind of an explosion all over again. And just, I just don't have words for it. It was absolutely beautiful. And again, this is one of those areas where my Christian background just wasn't enough for what I was experiencing. Because first off, I've met Jesus, and in this life review that I went through with him, there was no condemnation. He just loved me. It's like the life review wasn't for me to condemn myself. It was for me to see where I was still judging myself, to let go of the judgment, to let go of the hurt, so that I could feel the love more fully. The life review was a healing thing, not a judging thing. And then to come into God's presence, like my Christian background would have told me that God might have been this stern old man and that I needed Jesus to intercede with him. And yet the experience I was having in the presence of God was not that at all. It was this understanding of, wait a minute, this love that I've just felt from Jesus, which is bigger than anything I've ever known, that he learned it somewhere. And that if it were possible, that God's love is greater, that Jesus was just, he was like us. He was learning, he was understanding. And yet God had all of it. It was more. And so there was this recognition that never at any point was God capable of the type of judgment that I thought he was, just that he was mercy itself.
You mentioned the life review. What do you think is our purpose on earth? Is this kind of like a teaching lab, or do our experiences add value to what we experience in heaven?
So when I was talking to God, there were a number of things that were happening around me. Like everything up there it's all love. It's all designed to teach. It's all designed to lift. And so there were experiences that were taking place while I'm having these conversations. And one of the things that happened is I saw several beings of light who were carrying what looked like gifts and setting these gifts down in an area that I understood that they were being given to God. And I understood that these gifts were from me to God. We didn't have any conversation about the gifts at all. I just saw them, and like every question that I had on them, there's just understanding coming. And what I saw is that these gifts that I was giving to God were my experiences, that there was nobody in this world who was born to my parents, nobody in this world who had the particular set of strengths and weaknesses, who made the choices I made, who wrestled with the conflict between different ideas of truth and different ideas of love. And there was no one like me. But for some reason, those experiences for me as an individual mattered to God. And I don't mean to say that my experiences were any different than anybody else's in this world. It was an understanding that we all are doing this, that each one of us is like mining a perspective on truth and understanding for God in a way that causes the joy that exists in that heavenly space to grow. And to the extent that we all let go of our fear and our guilt and our shame, our judgment, and open to receive the love that is in that space, then we are each benefited from everybody else's experience in this world. Almost like we are explorers in a heavenly experiment designed to increase the joy and the love of that space even more than what it currently is.
Now, you're a scientist, so and I'm going to assume, you can tell me if you're wrong, that you believe that we're not the only intelligent life in the universe. So did you experience people or beings beyond Earth that were here in the heavens, or was it just humans from Earth that you experienced?
I wasn't shown the nature or identity of some of the beings of light that were there. The ones I did interact with all had an earthly origin. So I didn't get to see anything as to what might exist out in the rest of space.
So that might be one of the next experiences is, what's it like to experience heaven as an alien or an interstellar traveler? That would be kind of interesting. Don't you think that would be kind of a good thing to do?
You know, these days, nothing would surprise me. So
I wanted to ask you, based on your book, I know we've touched on a lot of different things, out of my curiosity. Is there anything in the book that you think is really important that we didn't touch on that you'd want our listeners to know about, so when they go and buy the book and listen to it, they know what to look for?
Sure. I think one of the concepts that we didn't really get to touch on is that the heaven that I was describing there, this heaven of not only the light itself, not only the experience with Jesus, but also that with God, that all of that light, all of that love, and even more, because what I was given to understand is that it's what I experienced was a drop in like an infinite ocean, and then it just goes on and on and on. And so there's more to experience. It's just deeper. That all of that is potentially available in our bodies, and that the distance between us and that heavenly state is not as great as we think. It's a distance which exists in thought alone. And to the extent that we can understand our inner space and start healing the hurts that have come down to us through our ancestry, through our society, that we have the capacity as individuals to start experiencing that love in the here and now. And that as we do this as individuals, it impacts our cultures, it impacts the world around us. That when enough of us are undergoing this healing process, connecting with heaven in deeper ways, that it will at some point cause a collapse of the entire system of consciousness that separates our world from the other side. At which point in time, all of those remaining in this world get to come through into that heavenly space together.
Well, now, is heaven something that is inside of us, or is it something that we go to? Is it something within us, or is it something that we go to?
Heaven is firstly an experience inside of us. And secondly, all that we experience, this was another aspect that we didn't get to touch on, is one of the things that God showed me was the structure of heaven and how it's created and how the joy continues to expand. He showed me that there was a light in all things. To the extent that we put thoughts into our hearts, those thoughts would go out into the light and bring back to us what we sent out. And so he showed me while I was there, he gave me the experience of it. And so it's not only an experience inside of us, because as we begin to unlock that love inside of us, the world around us starts to respond to it. It changes. So it is both an experience inside of us and an external experience.
And my last question would be the structure of heaven. Is it data? Is it numbers? What was the structure? Or are there even words to describe the structure?
I like the...
Is it DNA?
The structure of the structure of heaven was love itself. It's like living love, that everything was made out of this living intelligence. And being in heaven was the awareness to see it all as love, to experience it as it really is.
So I guess my other question I was going to have was, on Earth, we need oxygen and food, right, to survive, for sustenance. So when you're in heaven, it's just love and it's continuous. You don't have to feed on anything. It's always there. There's nothing that you need for sustenance. You don't have to breathe anything or eat anything. It's the love that sustains you, but it's just within you. It's just omnipresent. Is that accurate?
That was my experience of it, yes.
Oh, it's great. Well, Brent, thank you so much. This is excellent. Let us know where we can get your book and where we can follow what you're working on. And also mention briefly your first book, too, if you don't mind.
Sure thing. So my book that kind of summarizes these experiences and goes into a lot more detail is Bringing Heaven Home by Dr. Brent Satterfield, and it's available on Amazon.com, either paperback or Kindle. And you can follow me at theinnerworldmovement.com, innerworldmovement.com. We're also on Instagram and Facebook, Inner World Movement. So for those who end up getting the book and wanting to go deeper, connect with us, get in touch with us. So I did write a book several years ago, which would probably be useful to people who have familiarity with Christian consciousness. And it's kind of a bridge between the way that traditional Christianity thinks and the types of things that I was seeing on the other side. And so it's got a much slower build through biblical scripture leading up into some of these more advanced ideas.
That's on Amazon too?
That's on Amazon too. It's called Faith to Produce Miracles.
What do you do next after you've experienced heaven multiple times? Is there another project that you're working on?
That is a wonderful question. And when I get the answer, I'll let you know. But right now it's promoting the book. That's what I see for the next several months. And then working with Inner World Movement to start getting more tools out to people who are interested in that inner exploration and inner transformation.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for being on the show, Brent, and for sharing your great book and your experiences with us. I hope a lot of people check it out and follow you in your organization, the Inner World Movement.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's been great being here.
been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's AfraidOfNothingPodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout-out in an upcoming episode. And the world will know how swell you are.